Welcome to another episode of the Vikingology podcast. I'm co-host number one, CJ Adrian.
And I am co-host number two, Terry Barnes. And we are, as always, the art and science of the Viking Age. Yeah. All right. And today we're going to be more in the art section of Viking Age, I think, with our guest. So we are welcoming from Portland, Maine, Boston, by way of Sweden. We are welcoming Rowdy Garrison, who is the translator of the ancient manuscript known as the Impudent Edda. Correct?
Yes. It's coming from all the way 6 years ago. It was a pretty historic find in
ancient history, man. That's
yeah, it is ancient. Yeah. Fact that it hasn't been deleted. But thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, you're welcome. This is great. We were just saying before we started taping that we've been communicating, each of us in our own way, you all in the Viking verse together and killing each other, I guess. And
yep. may I say, just to start off, it is funny because Terry reached out to me with an email saying, "Hey, how about having this gentleman on the podcast?" And here's a copy of an advanced copy of his book, and I feel like I got a little duped because there was no extra information other than it's a translation of the Impudent Edda, and I started reading it, and I was like, "What am I reading?" What?
I remember specifically you said Thor and menstrual blood. I don't know what's happening right now.
What on earth is this? And then it just so happened to be she sent me that I think 2 days before you appeared on the other podcast that I was on, Vikings and Valkyries. And Ian explained very well on that podcast what it is that you do, and then suddenly it was like, okay, I get it. Yeah. All right, that's cool.
Right. So let's see. So you've written for a lot of different places. You've got Scandinavian Review, Sons of Norway, Viking Magazine, Medieval World, Culture and Conflict, Reactor, and then of course McSweeney's for humor, although all of it's humor, right, on some level. But there's real history in there, right?
Yeah. And then those first ones are not humor. They mentioned
first one, yeah, okay. So the one I like probably the best though is the Norse history for Bostonians, right? Or is it Norse mythology? Sorry, for Bostonians. And do you know Daniel McCoy's site, Norse Mythology for Smart People? Anyway,
I believe I've come across it at some point.
Yeah. Anyway, you can whatever, you can check. I mean, it's basic kind of stuff. But anyway, I was just like, that was the first thing that came to my mind because the t-shirt that I showed you I had on the other day, right? All you got to do is swap out the R for the H and you've got Norse mythology for Smaht people.
Put it right down in the Charles River Basin.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, wow. So you've got quite a little repertoire here of interesting stuff to I mean, obviously, why? Why?
The big question of why.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's fun, I guess. It's an interest, but it's fun. I don't know. I've always kind of gravitated towards kind of humorous things, or I think are humorous. It's subjective, so not everybody's gonna think something that someone else thinks is funny and all that. But just going back to kid times and being given assignments that I'd have to do something about, and second grade, I think it was, we had the little kid invention assignment for class, and everyone else is coming up with attempts at serious things, and I was like, I don't want to do this. And then I came up with an automated nose picking device or something like that, which was something that a little kid at that age would come up with, and carried it through to completion. And I think I got a good grade, but I think it was also one of those things where the other kids thought it was funny, and the teacher's but so yeah, I don't know. And then I get interested in Vikings at some point, and it's sort of that's, I don't know, just kind of how my mind works, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's like that's what I tell my students too, like with the sagas and stuff, it's kind of especially, the period that they're written about, right? The oral period of the Viking Age, and just think about, the different the changes in the stories, right? Depending on who tells them and when and where. I mean, there's kind of a kernel of some sort of thread that's similar, right? The same characters or whatever, but that, all we're doing is sort of kind of our modern interpretations of those stories, but we're doing them very much in the style that a Viking would have done it in,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Putting your own spin on it.
Yeah, yeah. They probably
Yeah.
would have liked your stuff. Like, I think they were kind of raunchy people, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I know there's certainly things that happen in those stories that are, not necessarily want to spell it out to like young children, perhaps, but maybe they did in those days. I guess we don't really know. But, and, most of the modern versions that we come across are kind of like hint, hint, wink, wink. This is, what's going on because we're kind of hinting at it, but, there's things that are going on that, maybe you don't want to have at a real formal dining sort of discussion and or something like that, present day. And so, but yeah, they were talking about all sorts of, minds down in the gutter type materials.
At least from our modern puritanical sense of things.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know, fun. It kind of lends itself to it too, like I always thought it was interesting that there were all these things going on that like none of the retellings ever like dive in and just saying it the way it is. It's and then you know, Odin's going for the meat of poetry, and some of the things he does along the way to acquire it are not the most kind-hearted or savory, and it's always kind of suggested, oh, he encountered these slaves. I mean, okay, that's one thing already, or thralls out in the field or whatever, and then basically manipulates them into killing one another, and goes and he meets Gunloud in the mountain and has like a just a friendly time with her for a few days, and then he goes on his way.
Friendly time.
So yeah, I was kind of like, oh, all the stuff that's going on here. It's like, I don't know. All the versions I ever came across kind of like that. Oh, they had a nice time together, and then he moved on.
I've been listening to the Neil Gaiman version, and he keeps it pretty PG, but I definitely was entertained by Odin drinking the mead of poetry, turning himself into an eagle, flying out back to Asgard, and then he had a like a cut where he said, "Well, for those of you with more sensitive stomachs, you may not want to listen to the next part." But he spewed the mead of poetry down into Asgard so that it could be, preserved. But then the giant had turned himself into an eagle and was in hot pursuit. And to get him off of his tail, literally, he pooped some of it out and hit him with it. And then apparently, if you drink that mead, then you'll basically be a Vogon from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Just your poetry will suffer.
Yeah.
Don't drink the mead out of Odin's butt.
Yeah. No. Yeah. My book has a chapter called
"Words to Live By."
Sorry.
Words to live by.
Yeah. Bad poets drink bird shit. So
that's the title of your next book.
Well, that's a chapter in the Impudent Edda. So yeah, calling it out.
Yeah.
Wow.
So why Boston? Let's dig into kind of a little bit of the history. By the way, I did pull up that email, Terry, and the way I described the Impudent Edda, and I hope you'll enjoy this, is I said it's basically the sagas as conveyed to us by the guys from Car Talk.
Yeah, that's a Boston connection.
That's apt. I always tend to say like a Mark Wahlberg movie character, but you're kind of getting, putting you in the right place. But sorry, what was the question? Like, why Boston?
Yeah, so let's go back to the roots. Like as an author, I always like to ask other authors. So who are you, and why are you the best person to have written this book? And I feel like since this is based in Boston, starting there would be a good place to explore.
Yeah. I mean, I think just because like that's where I was living at the time, and Boston's got its own distinct character. We all whether you've lived there or visited there or not, have come across some sort of Boston thing, most likely in pop culture, whether it's car talk or The Departed or Good Will Hunting or their stand-up comedy, Bill Burr, somebody like that, whatever it is, it has its own little image, I guess, and sort of character that goes along with that. And so I was living there, like right outside it, basically the Boston area. And it kind of hit me one day. So there's, to back up a little, Boston has these bizarre Leif Erikson monuments scattered around, well, in Boston and the surrounding towns. And so I was interested in these at the time. I guess I still am, but I was going and like looking at them because I hadn't been to them before, and somehow it started going through my head like one of these guys just like going off on like Eric the Red's voyage and just in the Boston accent with swear words and all that. And for whatever reason that came to me while I was at one of these forgotten monuments, and I thought it was an amusing idea. And so I wrote like a 600-word little thing like when I got home and sent it to McSweeney's, and the guy actually is born and bred in Massachusetts who runs the website, and he was like, cool, yeah, I'll take this. And that was how it started. So I mean, it just kind of spun off from there. That was 15 years ago now, so it's been a while.
What direction outside of Boston are you talking about?
For the monuments?
Or where you were raised or lived or whatever.
I mean, I was bopping around. So like, I mean, I moved there as a teenager. Like, I didn't really grow up there. I don't have the accent myself. You can probably tell. But so I bopped around. I lived in Salem a while, Waltham, down on Cape Cod for 1 year, on Rhode Island, New Hampshire as well. Those are getting a little further away. I live in Maine now. But these monuments, there's the three most notable ones anyway, are the Leif Erikson statue, which is in the city of Boston in Back Bay. It's a kind of a higher end neighborhood, shopping and also some housing. But then there's the concrete plaque at ground level that's like kind of in poor shape, that says this is where Leif Erikson built his house in Vineland in the year 1000, on the side of a road across the river in Cambridge next to a hospital that is just kind of at a street corner that it's just there. Yeah. Yeah. So it's there. And then there's another one in Weston, which is really like practically on the town line with Waltham, which I had lived at it for a period of time. And that's the tower. That's where they really went all out and like built this stone tower in honor and memory of Leif Erikson's Vinland settlement in Massachusetts on the side of the river. So yeah, they built that.
This all sounds like 19th century stuff, is it?
It is, yeah. It's all like late 19th century. They got carried away.
Like the Newport Tower in Rhode Island.
Yeah. I mean, that one is there too. There's a rock somewhere which I haven't seen that they thought had runic carvings somewhere between the Rhode Island border and Boston, which I think was also proven to be like, you guys are just projecting wishful thinking onto this 150 years ago or whatever. But
the Kensington runestone, right?
Yeah, kind of like that, but nowhere near as like cool or I guess I don't know if I should say cool, but it has a more people know about it, I guess, and seem to care about it.
Yeah, I've heard that there's actually, even though the people who perpetrated that like admitted to it, that there's still people that believe it's real.
Yeah. Really want it to be. The Vikings got to Minnesota first.
That's the way it is with Viking history, we've found, right, CJ? People just sort of make it what they want it to be.
Yeah. A lot of projection on it. Yeah. So is it fair to say that you living in Boston and seeing all this weird Leif Erikson iconography, if you will, is what plunged you into your interest in the Norse world? Is that when it started, or did that start before? And then when you lived in Boston, it was amplified by this curious mystery?
Yeah, no, I had it before. Like the Viking interest goes like, a lot longer. And it just kind of happened to be those two things kind of converged in this uh one day, I guess, where I was checking, because I was already interested in all the Viking history. And it's like, oh, there's monuments to Vikings in Boston. I didn't know that. That's cool. And so, you go to them if you're interested in this type of stuff, or at least I did, and you then start realizing like, oh, there's, I don't know. I mean, it the as far as the writing goes, and like the McSweeney's articles and the books that derived from that, it just kind of the Leif Erikson monuments didn't really have really a part in that, except for the fact that I happened to be visiting one when the idea came to me to have some drunken Boston bar crawling sort of individual carrying on about Viking history and mythology. I just happened to be at one when the idea hit me, and then those two things, yeah.
How many bars did you go to for research?
Sorry?
How many bars did you go to for research?
I mean, you don't have to go to that many, but in order to encounter these characters, really, playing on the local recreational hockey league is really like just a resource-rich environment, and going into the locker rooms of people who have either played hockey their whole life but aren't good at it, or are starting a little later. You're all kind of in there in the locker room together, and it's a rich tapestry of poetry that you end up hearing in that environment.
And you just dress them up like Vikings in your mind, and voila, you've got some material.
Yeah, you have all sorts of turns of phrases and kind of local character and flair to kind of be inspired by, and then project that onto the Viking thing, because the contrast, I think, is kind of where the humor ends up being. You don't expect a character like that to go off on like some obscure topic of medieval history or whatever. It's kind of, the juxtaposition is, I think, sort of a lot of times the key to humor working. But, mine, but lots of other things too. I mean, there's different types of humor, but that's kind of something you don't expect. Is a lot of times where we have funny things happening, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So peeling back the onion even further. So where did your fascination with the Norse world kind of start? Is there like a family connection, or did you just kind of accidentally fall into it like I did? Or I mean, because that's actually, my son asked me the other day. He said, because we're moving, and so I gave him my shields. I couldn't ship them to France. It wasn't just because it was expensive to ship shields to France. It was going to be like $1,200 per shield, but it was also because I could not verify that the steel used to make the boss of each shield wasn't steel imported from Russia.
Whoa.
Oh.
Yeah, so France was, so the French are saying we won't take anything that could possibly be Russian steel or Russian products. And because I couldn't verify, I didn't know. I mean, this was fan mail. These were reenactment groups out of California and elsewhere that said, here, hey, we want to send you a shield. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll take a shield. Yeah, I'd love a shield. I don't know how they made it. I don't have a receipt for the steel. But then my son, I was giving him the shield, and he's just like, why do you like the Vikings so much? I was like, when I went to school, I was really interested in the medieval period, really like the beginning of chivalry. But then the more I looked, the more these pesky Viking things kept popping up. And even when I was in college, I was like, I'll do ancient Russia. They weren't there. The first thing we learned, Vikings. And they just kept showing up. And then it just kept and I can't get out of it, guys. I'm stuck. I'm kidding.
No, it's a bottomless interest if you have it.
Once you're in, you're in. But yeah, so how did it start for you?
Pretty similar sort of starting point actually to what you're saying. Not any specific real family connection or anything. Like a lot of times people think like, oh, maybe it's Scandinavian heritage or something like that. Like not really. My dad's grandparents were very Lutheran and from a very Lutheran part of the Midwest, but they themselves were not uh, of Nordic ancestry. But they did go on like a church group tour of the Nordic countries when I was a little kid, and I got like a little Viking doll and a Dollahest when they came back when I was little. I mean, the little Viking doll is what I use as my profile photo online. I just photoshopped Boston Bruins logo onto it, but that's where that doll came from. So I mean, so there's sort of an awareness at an early age, and then also a family trip to Epcot at Disney World resulted in being sort of impressed with Vikings because there was some sort of Viking exhibit that they had there. I don't exactly remember how it worked, but it was like a little ride tour of like, oh, here's ancient Roman Greece, and there's like ancient China, and then maybe the Mayans, and then we get to Norway or somewhere, and there's like big guy wearing a bear coat and a cloak and a big sword or something like that. Probably even had horned helmets, given it was Disney. I don't know, but I can't remember. But it made an impression. It was like, oh, that's cool. And so I just kind of always, after that, I think really kind of gravitated towards medieval stuff. Robin Hood was big, and eventually I had to read a book, the Vikings North Atlantic Saga, I think it was called in college. And that yes, that one. That is the one. And so that was the eye opener of like, oh, I kind of always thought they were cool. It's like, oh wait, there's so much more to it, and so that sort of set off this trajectory. And I was already sort of interested in Scandinavia anyway too, just because of that interest. There's a lot of music I like that comes from those countries. I like hockey. Finland and Sweden both produce a lot of NHL hockey players, and so I also had this kind of Scandinavian interest developing, in parallel somewhat. And yeah, so specifically college age and beyond is kind of like, okay, these are big interests. So
you mentioned before, I think in your other interview too, like that book.
Oh yeah, yep.
That had some kind of influence on you as well.
I read that in college. I was in Sweden on a study abroad and read it, and yeah, it was one of the first Viking fiction books I read. I guess the other would be the Michael Crichton one that turned into the 13th Warrior, because there wasn't really a whole lot.
Eaters of the Dead, yeah, that was
Yeah,
a kind of a remake of Beowulf, if you will.
yeah. So those are probably the first two fictional Viking type books I read. Some years apart, as Longships was a little later, but it's a bit of a classic. So
yeah, because what is it like? Well, I held it up, but I didn't say for people who are just listening. But it's The Long Ships by Frans Bengtson. But it's like what, 1950s or something original?
Yeah, I think it was something like that when it was released, and I think it was like 2 parts, and it's, kind of combining into one, and it's very much like historic fiction, and it has a sort of an older tone or writing style to it, but well done, and it's just a fun book. I don't think it's like necessarily the easiest to find, but it's out there. You can find it easily if you want to.
Yeah. That tone thing you just said, it reminds me of the saga, some of the saga translations, especially there's one kind of database out there that has a lot of them, and especially in English translation, but it's based on one of the ones that was done in like the 1890s or something, and it's sort of like Viking saying like thee and thou and wild like that. It's like, I don't know, this doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, like the very, very Victorian and England era style of talking. Like there are a couple early, I think they're late 19th century, early 20th century Viking fiction books, like Styrbjorn the Strong and then Eric Bright Eyes. I don't know if you ever came across either of those, but like original fiction, but written in that same tone. They're all like theen and thowing one another and have like more of this like chivalry sort of thing going on than, what you'd expect. Some of the wording is really funny though. I mean, it's not meant to be funny maybe, but I find it to be.
Well, so
Yeah,
you're talking about the Edda. So I want to sort of get your impression of Snorri, because people always, I have my own little sort of, I don't know. I kind of defend Snorri a little bit, because everybody's so used to like, well, the first thing you're supposed to say is, well, he wrote later and he's a Christian, and so like basically discount half of what he says and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just kind of like, I don't know. He's an Icelander. He's writing about his own people and the history of his own people, and he's not writing in Latin. At least he's not, taking that high road, as it were, and really sort of trying to put them in their place. But I always sort of feel like what would his motive be for like trashing his own people? I mean, and not like he's not exaggerating or doing some things. I understand it's not. Yeah, I mean, I get the whole bias thing a little bit, but I sort of feel like, well, come on, I want to give the guy a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that he's going to like try to do right by his own people and their history. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad he did it because I mean, you take away his volumes of work and what are we left with? There's still some stuff, but like, you know, regardless of like whatever sort of bias or complaints you might be able to make about how he did it or what he did exactly and what his motives are, like we should all be sort of glad that he did and that they survived because, it adds a lot and you can just kind of try and sift through it however you want. Like, but yeah, so I mean, I think as a person, he sounds like he was kind of a scoundrel, like really, really doing what he can to get in the good graces of the king of Norway, from what I recall reading, but
Didn't work out for him in the end.
yeah, groveling in the basement.
Yeah, right. Scoundrel's death.
Yeah, yeah. But he had that nice hot spring out at his house. He could relax in whenever he wanted until he died. Violent death. Yeah.
I've been there. Have you been there to where?
I haven't. No, I wanted to, but it was like it just couldn't work out. But
you should go there. Like at least for me, it was just like, really, this is it. like Iceland is. It's like I don't even know. It takes like an hour and a half or 2 hours, north of Reykjavik to even get there. And then it's just like out in the middle of freaking nowhere. Like there's literally nothing around. It's just this church and his little pool and a statue of him. And then like the basement of the church is like, a little Snorri museum, of course. But otherwise, man, it would have been pretty like depressing and isolating to live out here in like the 1200s. No wonder he busied himself with writing the history of his people.
Yeah, he had nothing else to do. He's like, I've already spent 3 hours in the hot tub. I guess I'll go write my book again.
The pub is like 2 hours away. I'm like,
yeah, like I can see my enemies coming from long distance if I need to prepare myself.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, and the pub comment was not like an accident. Or like that was one of the places that we stopped. We're like, all right, like on the way back to Reykjavik, there was some like little like in their barn brew pub, kind of thing going on that was very similar to what we have out here in Portland. A lot of craft brewing and stuff.
Oh yeah.
So like the best picture is my husband, lined up with this like taster, glasses of various beers, but we're just literally in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. It's probably more like how it used to be. Like go to any different farmstead and they'll have their own different beer for you. You travel the vast lava fields or whatever.
Yeah.
To get to the next point.
Exactly.
They have to be, what is it? The 30 miles apart is what you could reasonably do in a day, right? So they just have every 30 miles, you have another one with a little extra, you can sleep here tonight and have our beer. And then next day you walk 30 miles and then there's another one.
Yeah, it's not a bad way to go, make a whole vacation of that, just hiking across Iceland, stopping at bed and breakfast that have their own beer and hot spring, and go the next day of the next one.
That's the Viking Age, though, right? I mean, that's that stuff with that time period, not time period, but distance and stuff, right? I mean, nowadays it's I mean, for as many tourists as go there, I mean, it's insane, but also I'm thankful. They just hang on to their own thing and their own way of life, and they're like, yeah, we're not accommodating you. We're not building out any special anything to accommodate you. Because I'll have friends be like, yeah, well, I'm just gonna go, and then I'll just wing it and go down to that area, And I'm like, do you have a place to stay? Do you have? And you're like, no, okay, you need to find one because there are none. Like,
Yeah.
there are not Motel 6s everywhere in Iceland. Like, you're going to be out of luck out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Pretty desolate once you get out of Reykjavik. I mean, little
Yeah.
towns, but yeah, long stretches of roadway with nothing, and then the weird weather and everything doesn't really.
Yeah.
Oh, it matters if you're plodding along.
Yeah.
It's a random snowstorm gets you.
Oh, yeah. I've seen it snow on the beach. Weird. So you're in Sweden now. You're in the Viking homelands. So, and you've been spending some time there, like annually, what, for about the last 2 or 3 years or something?
Yeah, a couple years really. The third year back was actually Iceland, but um, but yeah. So I'm here for like a month. I'm just maybe past the halfway point now, and that's cool. I like Sweden. I had like actually lived here in 2015 on a fellowship from the American Scandinavian Foundation, and so like coming back when I can, and I've sort of coming out of the pandemic years figured out or realized or whatever that it's doable. I just work remote since even before the pandemic, and you can find pretty good deals if you're willing to stay that long. There's like discounts that kick in at the month mark. So so like it kind of works out, sort of a combination of vacation and still getting work done. So you know you don't have to be anywhere, specifically in Maine, like get deal with all that when I get back.
What part of Sweden are you in?
I'm in Kalmar right now, which is southeast corner, right across from like the literal island of Öland. Sweden might have a little bit more name recognition among people who are interested in, Viking and ancient stuff. There's a lot of gold that's been found there, and they have a reconstructed Viking fortress and things like that. But yeah, kind of the southeast corner.
Not
So,
very far from where my great grandfather.
yeah.
Google Map was like 45 minutes away or something like that from where you are.
Okay, yeah,
I can see why he left. It looks like it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a nice. I like this town, but yeah, middle of nowhere places. But we have those too. They're everywhere. So I guess kind of makes you wonder where did he go? Somewhere much more populated.
I still love the story. I think I've told it on this podcast before of René Descartes and how he died. It's so I forget the name. I think it's Princess Anne of Sweden. Was it Anne? Anyway, it's a princess of Sweden who asked her ministers, "Who is the most learned man in all of Europe?" And I want to learn from him. And they said, "Well, princess, the most learned man in all of Europe would be René Descartes, the French philosopher, and he lives in Paris." So she said, "Well, let's invite him here, and I would like to learn from him." So they sent an invitation, and René Descartes, who's in Paris, having his little wine and having the good life, la belle vie, la plaisance, le petit plaisir. He's just, life is good in France. Huh? And he gets a letter and says, "Oh, well, I can't refuse a princess, from Sweden." So he goes up there to visit, and she has him follow her rigid daily routine, which included horseback riding at dawn, shooting bows and arrows and doing this and that, and just these long days in the dark and cold and da 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 da. And as the story was told to me as a joke and after 2 weeks, he died. which is true. He actually died. Now the real story is historians think that he was poisoned. There's some kind of foul play, but the joke is that you get a French guy from Paris who's living the good life, goes up to Sweden for 2 weeks and dies.
Yeah.
life is harder up there.
Yeah. It's super fitting. Like, they have a royal palace in the outskirts of Stockholm, sort of like Sweden's answer to Versailles, which I take it you'd be familiar with, being, the big French palace. But you go to it and it's like all of the marble staircase and all that is just like wood that's been painted to look like marble. Like, they couldn't afford like the actual marble at the time. It was just not. They weren't living the good life like the Frenchmen in this.
Oh, no, all the
kind of
gold
like trying to
leaf
faking it till you're making it.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah, Versailles is the smaller palace.
Is it?
It was the hunting. It's actually a hunting lodge.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Oh,
It was
wow.
before the refurbishments.
Yeah, those were Versailles is an interesting place. Yeah, and then the Louvre is just, I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's just so big, and I always have people who ask me, hey, what do I need to go look at the Louvre? I always tell them, go down to the basement and go look at the wall of Paris that was attacked by the Vikings. It's there. It's awesome.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and you can stand at the base of the wall because they dug it out, made a basement out of it, so you can go down.
Oh, that's cool.
Thing for the Vikings. So you're like, oh, look, and then of course it just goes up to a ceiling. But then you just say, well, imagine that ceiling is actually a battlement, and then that's how high they would have had to climb to get through, to get over, and they had to build ladders for that, and that's, I always say, go down and look at the Vikings first, and then if you get bored there, go over to the Egyptian exhibit and look at all the big statues of Atum, the first kind of celestial being that came into existence and masturbated the universe into existence. Yeah, that's true. That's actually happened. I got in trouble teaching that to sixth graders because guess when they teach ancient Egypt in the U.S. curriculum? Sixth grade, and they bring up Atum and how he played with himself, and I was like, this doesn't belong in a U.S. textbook. What happened to Puritanism? What are you guys doing? I was like, I can't teach this. I'm a 22-year-old young man with a career ahead of me that will end if I teach. I can't teach. I brought it up to the vice principal, and she was like, no, it's fine. I was like, no, it's not fine. I'm not teaching this.
It's eventually going to be a complaint.
I was like, I think, like, you guys come into my classroom and say, don't ever leave your door closed. As a young male professor, don't ever leave your door closed. But you want me to teach this?
Yeah. I didn't know that's how the universe started in the Egyptian cosmos, but yeah.
He got bored. What do you guys do when they're bored?
Oh my God.
Boom, there goes. And so
I don't know. There's I can easily imagine the Bostonian version retelling that specific myth.
That was the Bostonian version.
Yeah, that's getting pretty close. We just need to drop in a few swear words and we're pretty much there.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, what's the Viking version? It's like the mist and the cold and the hot kind of come together and somehow create something, but then you get a cow who licks salt blocks, and then the gods appear from that, and it's just like, all right, these people are on some kind of hallucinogenic substance.
Like the milk.
Aren't there? Around and makes this up.
I feel like the great cow is something that's in like I remember seeing something about some mythologies in Africa that have the great cow as well. So it could just be a motif. In India, cows are sacred. Something about, we've had a long human relationship with cows. Who knows? But yes, you're right. They probably were, they ate something wrong and
got poisoning.
Yeah. Starving out in the frozen tundra.
Right? The Yggdrasil, the tree, that's definitely a motif you see in other cultures as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's like you say all the time, Terry, humans can only do like 5 things.
We're not so smart.
We try, though. We try. Some of us.
Okay, so I have a question for both of you, because I've been talking to some people about this, including one of my students who's a veteran. I talked with Carlin for like an hour yesterday about this because he's a military history guy, whatever. I'm interested in the just sort of the concept of what is a warrior. And obviously within the Viking Age, because that's what we're about here. But just like what does it? What do you think that means? Actually, what do you think? In the context of the Scandinavians in the Viking Age, what did they think a warrior was, and maybe how would that be different than what a soldier is today? Because I have something that my student shared with me, and he was in the army, and it's this creed. He said that they had to like kind of restate every once in a while, and it uses the word warrior a few times in it. And so it's sort of interesting to me then to think about, what does a warrior look like in the Middle Ages or the ancient world compared to like now, except for we're still sort of kind of encouraging these men and women to conceptualize themselves as warriors. And so I don't know, what do you guys think that? What is that?
You want to take a stab at it?
Sure, yeah. Sort of a interesting question. I guess the first thing that comes to mind to me is sort of this full-time role, it's a professional elite thing, hired to or working for, not, maybe not hired, but, services in exchange for really cool gifts and feasts and things like that, for a king or jarl or whatever other local, leader might be. And that is this sort of an elite corps type of full-time thing. And I think when we think of soldiers, we tend to think more of like modern day, got done with high school and you enlisted or something like that. And, and maybe other times of history too, it's just sort of people that are kind of drafted or forced to be conscripted or something like that. Whereas in the time period we're talking about, it was something a little different and elevated and something, yeah, along those lines. And yeah, certainly sort of maybe some code of honor that went along with it, which is a little different than probably what we would relate to today in our modern world. But I don't know. That's what I have to say about it. I don't know if that gets to like what you're thinking,
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
CJ has anything else to say. Or
okay,
whatever.
CJ, what about you?
Oh gosh, it's that's a big question to unpack, Terry.
That's what we're here.
I think your article on Tupac could have been a Viking. Hits at this a little bit. The Drengstrapper, or am I saying that right? Something the Drenger, right? Yeah. So there was an identity attached to the ability to kill another human being. The thing about the Viking Age, I think, is it predates those things that are at the root of what we consider a warrior today. I think, because I think what we think of as a warrior comes to us from the later Middle Ages, when chivalry codified warriorhood. And when we think of a warrior, to your point, Rowdy, versus a soldier is more of a conscript. The first kingdom in Europe to have, say, a standing army with conscripts and mercenaries as the bulk of its military force was France, because it was being attacked all the time. So they couldn't rely on the nobility to fight for them and defend the entire country, because there's just too few of them, right? So they had to expand their numbers. Plus, you had firearms that neutralized a knight's ability to be effective in combat and so forth. So what's a warrior? I think our modern conception really is rooted in that concept of chivalry. Actually, hang on.
Don't move. Your camera's gonna freak out.
Around. Sure, I even have this. In fact, going back to France, this is a knight's own book of chivalry by Geoffroy de Charny, who attempted to. I really like this book. There's so many things in here that make me laugh. I love the thing about, like, if you see a maiden walking by herself, do not dishonor her by walking up to her and making advances. But if she's accompanied by another knight, you may kill him and take her as your prize. It's great. It's like, I mean, just the thinking. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, if we go down to the nuts and bolts, what is a warrior? A warrior is someone whose entire life revolves around the cultivation of skills designed to end another human life, not a hunter, but a human. I think that's the fundamental thing. And so if you look at chivalry, like the feudal system, fief, the feudal lands, all of the resources of that land moved upward toward the people at the top, right? You have the three classes in the Middle Ages: those who fight, those who pray, and those who toil, right? And so you have an organization of society that feeds income, so that all your entire life is essentially just training for and preparing for that moment when you're going to go fight another human being. It's not a, I mean, it kind of became a sport in the Middle Ages too, because you have the tournaments, and the goal wasn't to kill the person because you could make more money capturing them and ransoming them. But if you go back a little bit earlier, I mean, that still kind of holds. But if you go to the Viking Age, it's like what's the goal of the warrior? It's to be able to kill another human being, right? So it's and we've talked to it with like Rainer and I mean, well, and that's just it. Is then in this environment where you have people who spend their lives dedicated to essentially the craft of killing, then society has to regulate that in a certain sense. So what you see is attempts at creating that codification, like a book of chivalry. Another good example is in Spain. They had las siete partidas, which was 7 proposals that were a legal framework in the early Middle Ages that were meant to regulate a lot of this violence that was happening, because they had so many people whose job it was to kill other people. And then they had they had the four virtues, which was it was always something religious, right? Because what they're trying to do is, it was society trying to regulate this. And then you see that expression happen with the peace and truce of God, the 2 edicts that happened at the 11th century. So like you just see, so you have kind of 2 things running in parallel, which is you have this profession, warriorhood. My job, like, what's the number one virtue of a knight? And I go to knights because we just know so much more about them. But if you think about the number one thing for a knight, it's prowess. And I had a professor in college who actually did a really good job of explaining this. He took Star Wars and he said, okay, here's Luke Skywalker and here's Darth Vader. Who would have been considered the ultimate embodiment of chivalry and knighthood in the Middle Ages? And of course, all the people in the class, well, it'd be Luke Skywalker because he's the good guy. No, those are modern virtues. In the Middle Ages, it was your ability to take down another human being. Darth Vader is the ultimate because he has one thing that puts him above everybody: prowess. Nobody wants to mess with that guy because he will kill you. That's his job, right? So, so I think when you think of warriorhood, right, you have, that's the profession, and then you see kind of alongside that society trying to regulate that. That's what the Crusades were about, right? We have this whole class of warriors who have nothing better to do than to kill each other, and they were doing that way too often, so the church thought. And they're like, well, this kind of goes against Christianity, doesn't it? So then the Pope's like, well, what do we do? Well, let's send them somewhere where we don't care if they kill people. That was pretty much the idea, right? And they did, and they sent them all off, and they killed a bunch of people who, and then that caused all sorts of other problems. So I think I've rambled on too much. But yeah, you ask a big question, you're going to get a weird answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I think the common thread in all of that I agree with and have come to, and looking at all of this stuff is, and it doesn't even matter. Like, some of it I know I've mentioned before, I think in the podcast or wherever, that I've looked at even like Native American tribes and their sort of chieftain level structure and the warriors of those eras. And even when I was talking to Carlin yesterday, he's done a lot of research like into the Apache. I mean, the same kind of thing, but other cultures in the world. I mean, the samurai in Japan or wherever. I mean, it's like there's consistencies there in what it means to be a warrior. And so the 2 main things that I see that are, one that's different from now, and the other is, I think, similar to now because of this sort of code. The honor code part of it is a big deal always, and it's always there. But then the other part I think that's different is prior. It's something that somebody's enculturated into very early, right? So like you were saying, TJ, it's a lifestyle. And whereas now it's like, Or like you said, rowdy, you're just like, it's just a teenager, but like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I don't want to go to college. I'll just go in the military or whatever. But then they like take you as a person and craft you into this other being, and you may or may not see combat, etc. And then they spit you out the other end at some point, right? And then you like go back to normal life. And so, there's a difference there, but also the code part, I think that's really interesting. As I was reading this book, that actually David Zori, a friend of the show, recommended to me, called The Code of the Warrior, by this woman, Shannon French, who wrote it. I think it was like 2017 or something that it was published, but she teaches philosophy and ethics, and she had taught at the Naval Academy for like 15 years. So this is like, trying to help these cadets who are going to be officers sort of understand these codes of ethics and all that kind of stuff. And in the modern sense, it's like now the code of ethics is about helping people have an understanding of themselves that enables them to separate themselves from the animals, basically, right? And it's like we know in the laws in Iceland, at least in the Viking Age, there is a difference between killing and murder, right? And they view those things differently. One's underhanded, one's not. One's legally allowed, one's not. That kind of stuff. And that it's the same concept here, where you're going to like take these poor 18-year-olds and send them off to war, and then like try not to damage them. Well, one of the ways to do that and sort of have them have a lifeline to pull out, back into some sort of normalcy and not have PTSD, or at least not too badly, is to say, here's the code that gave you the permission to be this killing machine because of good reasons, and we only do it at certain times in certain places for certain reasons. And it's basically the fine line that separates you from being a serial killer or something, right? And so you have to have this in your mind in order to like be able to live with what you're being asked to do. Whereas I think in the Middle Ages or in the Viking Age or in a lot of these ancient and medieval cultures, I'm not exactly so sure if they experience PTSD all that much. I think, when you live in an embedded culture like that and it's seen as an ideal, I don't know, Rowdy, what do you think?
I mean, it's an interesting idea. I've chatted a little bit with a guy. He's an artist who goes by the name of Scarpeden online, Jacob Faust, and he has a lot of interesting ideas. And I know he's kind of based on some research. He sent me a paper that somebody wrote about this topic, that the whole berserker thing kind of fits in with post-traumatic stress kind of sort of response behaviorisms, and just the way that the descriptions are in the sagas of kind of how the berserkers being a little off, and like some of that kind of fits with some of the symptoms that have happened in modern day people returning from war with with that, and so I don't know, it's not really something I guess I have like a ton of knowledge or familiarity about. Like, I mean, I've read plenty about the Vikings and the sagas and all that, but it's interesting because I haven't really you know thought too deeply about this specific aspect before. But I think there's just some interesting ideas, and the whole uh, point that Jacob brought up about berserkers kind of displaying these behavioral patterns is kind of like, oh, that's interesting. I feel like that ought to be studied more. And um, I don't know how much it has been, a little bit, but it seems like there's probably room for more.
Yeah, I think it has definitely been studied a little bit for sure. I mean, it does get to I think just because of in my interest, obviously, I'm just being interested in Vikings, but it's like, I mean, this is an iconic image, right? I mean, if you say Vikings to just about anybody, well, what's going to pop into their head? Maybe a horned helmet, a long ship, but a dude who's like a badass dude, right? That's a killing machine or whatever. And so then it's like, okay, well, you think that's cool. Do you want to go back there and live amongst those dudes? Like, do you even know what that life is like? And and how those people acted. And I mean, there are laws in the Icelandic Gragas about like can't fall into a berserker's rage. They don't want you to do that. So trying to regulate. Like you say, CJ, is sort of like you need these people, but this is also the same thing like the Code of the Warrior book. It's like for now, even. Well, we need to have a certain segment of the population that's there that's going to go out and risk their lives to defend the rest of us. So how do we simultaneously create them and yet could put curbs around them so that they aren't menaces to society? It's just, this has been in my mind, so it's just interesting.
Just to draw a really wacky parallel, but if you think about it, it's kind of an extension of this idea, right? So in Viking Age society, in the Middle Ages, human beings were the weapon. So society's weapons, how you defended your territory, how you defended your village, how you gained land, acquired wealth, etc. It was through human capital, we'll call it, right? So it's people. Then the arms race goes to where now these people have swords, now they have shields, now they have bows and arrows, now they have guns, now they have this. And so you see repeatedly through modern history this evolution of not only the weaponry, but also the regulations society imposes on them. And then you can come to the modern, essentially, and I think this is relevant for current events because we have two nuclear powers that are at each other's throats right now, which is kind of terrifying. But there's an international convention, there's some international law around if you have nuclear weapons, this is how you should behave, and this is what so you can kind of see society trying to regulate in the same manner, but the weapons aren't people anymore, so it's not an honor code, but there is a code of sorts in terms of how you should behave with them. And we see that also with not just the nuclear weapons, but chemical weapons, the international conventions on using those or prohibiting those. So we see that expressing itself through in the last 1,200 years, and I think those kind of go hand in hand. You brought up a good thought, Terry, too, because I've been doing a lot of digging into kind of the so-called causes of the Viking Age, and looking at James Barrett's work and Soren Sinnebeck's work, Ben, our friend Ben of the show, Ben Raffield, polygyny, operational sex ratios, all that fun stuff. And I was just thinking, when you think about all the scholarship that's being done on warriorhood and what is a warrior, Drengar, and all of that, those are the top people in society whose profession it is to be a fighter, to kill another human being, essentially. And those are the people that are being regulated through this honor code. But if you think about like James Barrett's youth bulge, right, where he says it's a youth bulge that happened, and societal pressures, and Abbasid silver came in, offset the bride price, etc. And so then these people leave. Well, if you think about it in that context, then you could have a farmer's son who's not a warrior who could be joining these expeditions. So they got me thinking of like, so how many people in the early Viking Age, at least, let's say early 9th century, late 8th century, were indeed warriors, and how many of these were just kind of regular kids who were just looking for portable wealth to be able to have reproductive opportunities at home? That's an interesting question too. And how does that play? Yeah,
but I think based on what I'm finding, and that like what I just said about the enculturation, those two things are inseparable. Those kids that are going out to do that at 17 have been trained to do that since they were 5. And so they don't know any other identity.
So it's not the elites of society, it's all of society works within the same framework.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. And then even for those who aren't elite, or like the women and the old men or whatever, they're like in service to it also in some way, shape, or form, right? Those warriors need clothes and food and ships to be built. And
well, and we talk about how these are tiny groups of people compared to the larger populations of Southern Europe, right? Western Europe and even Eastern, right? So you would need your entire society to be mobilized in that manner, versus if you look at, say, medieval France, Britain, with chivalry, that was just reserved for the elites as a means to regulate the human weapon, the human capital in warfare, right? So because if your entire society is all fighters, you're going to have a bad time. You're not going to be able to hold a society together very well. And that could be something that affected Scandinavia too, is because they're all warriors and that goes into Ashby's work on the social capital, right? Where everyone's trying to be a hero. We have that in the US. Everybody wants to be a billionaire, right? And so if everybody wants to be a top warrior, then you're going to send out a lot of warriors overseas to do some bad stuff to prove yourself, right?
Welcome to our playground, Ratty. Turn out like insane Viking people.
now we're just thinking out loud.
So are we inspiring you to write about something else? Or are you working on something else as far as, Norse themes?
Yeah, actually. There's a couple of short articles going to be released pretty soon with the Medieval World, and then another with Scandinavian Review, and then uh new book project. It's going to be sort of a spiritual companion to the Impudent Edda. Although, well, I say that meaning it's just like it's kind of related, but it's going to be about history instead of mythology. Going to do an illustrated Boston humor, Viking history sort of thing with my friend Matt Smith, who's the illustrator that did the cover of the Impudent Edda, and he's got his own Icelandic saga-inspired graphic novel called Barbarian Lord, and so we're gonna join forces on that and actually attempt to launch it on Kickstarter this summer. So we'll see what happens. So, but become sort of interested in giving that a try. So I guess that's what's in the works right now, anyhow. But
so is this your regular job, writing?
No.
You have a pay the bills kind of job.
Yeah. No, I mean, that'd be cool if this was it, but far from it. So this is like a glorified hobby, basically. But I've been at it for quite a while, and gradually, everything that I've released so far has been like really slow gestation process. Years in the making, because I have a lot of it already online, or I'd started it so long ago, and then so this forthcoming idea of the history book is going to be probably the final thing I can do that will rely on or build on material that I've got. And if I want to do anything new after that, it's gonna be like, oh geez, I hope I can do it in under 8 years or whatever.
Well, you know what? That now I will interject the other thing that we were thinking about, like, not to go about this too long, but so I'm glad to hear you say it will take you 8 years, because then what that suggests to me is you write your own material.
Yeah. No,
You do not let the tech overlords write it.
No, I'm pretty devout in that sense. No, I have never done anything with AI, like even just to ask it a question about something like so because that would be a different use. But yeah, the kind of generative for your own creative stuff is like it ought to be made by humans. So and I know that's changing.
Yeah. So how has the reception been amongst Bostonians for your catering the Viking Age to them?
When I do hear things, it's usually pretty positive. Like people seem to enjoy that angle. Uh, every once in a while, there's somebody who's like, I just don't get it. Like this is like, I don't get it. Like I just don't. And so that happens too. But it's really there's kind of two pieces to that also, where the articles all online are like heavily Bostonized, for lack of a better word. Like everything's misspelled, or if it can be misspelled, it is misspelled. So like your example of I'm Smaht as opposed to I'm smart. It's spelled I'm Smaht with an H. In the first book I released called Norse Mythology for Bostonians, and the McSweeney's articles online, the Impudent Edda translated that into standard English so that people who don't want to like struggle trying to read misspelled Boston dialect will be able to have a normal reading experience. and so that's been I'd say better received, just because it's like, okay, I don't have to have like my mindset like I'm from Boston or I live there or whatever, and I you know, like the movies and, you know, radio shows and stuff we were talking about earlier. You know, there's like a Boston angle to those things, but everyone can enjoy them. It's just kind of Boston, sort of like the gloss on it. But, you know, that's the kind of more how the impudent Edda is. I mean, it's part of it, but it's not so in the weeds that it's just going to be a nuisance. Whereas I think the first book, probably you could describe it as such as that if you wanted to. But some people liked it. I mean, I've been sort of surprised to see how a few people had very positive reactions to that. But it's like they were from Boston. They were like, "Oh, this is cool. Like this is our accent." you know? It's a different thing. But
I can imagine it being like the feeling of like being either in on the joke or not. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think there's definitely that's true of the articles and the first Norse Mythology for Bostonians book, and then I think the second one, the Impeded Edda, it's not, like you don't have to be in on the Boston thing for it. And that was the whole idea. I mean, it helps if you have an interest in Vikings or Norse mythology. There will be certain jokes you might not get if you don't have that as an interest, but the Boston piece isn't going to be a problem, whereas in the first one potentially is.
like you don't know why Loki turns into a horse to have a horse named Sleipnir.
Yeah. Well, there's you might not understand why it's happening, but you'll understand, it told in a new way.
Yeah, some of my students think that's an example of gender fluidity. I'm like,
yeah. Well, because they're saying you can project all sorts of stuff onto this. People do. It's all what we want it to be.
Loki is all kinds of fluid.
Yeah.
He also turned into a fish. Is that like the same thing?
Fluidity.
Yeah, right? Well, I don't know. This sounds like one of our good meandering podcasts, CJ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Meandering's good.
Following the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
You cover more territory if you do that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. It's we have fun.
Yeah,
well, I have an awakening baby on the way. So he's taking a nap, thankfully, during the podcast. I was worried.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. It's good to see you again.
Yeah,
you survived this one. Congratulations.
Sorry?
You survived this one. Congratulations.
Yeah. No atomic device to vaporize me in the end or whatever it was.
I think you were sucked into a miniature black hole.
Was that it? Okay.
Yeah.
It's an epic way to go out either case, you know.
Good fighting.
Makes spaghetti out of your body.
And for those listening who have no idea what we're talking about, we were both on a podcast called Vikings and Valkyries by Ian Sharp. You can check it out on Apple Podcasts and anywhere you can find podcasts. It's on the Vikingverse website too, vikingverse.com. And it's a lot of fun. It was a live action playthrough of a role-playing game by Ian Sharp called When the Wolf Comes. And it's based on Norse mythology. And the premise is, what if the Norse gods had won out over Christianity? What would the world have looked like? It takes place in 1974, and the Vikings have already figured out space travel and discovered 9 new habitable worlds. And Rowdy and I got to gallivant around. Actually, we were back in time during the Beowulf in that episode. But there's time travel.
Yeah, well, people can check out our catalog. We did an interview with Ian.
Yes.
I don't know, a year ago or something like that. He reached out to us, which was great. And so people can check that out. I mean, he's got, for all the fun he has with it, he's got an unbelievably amazing foundation of knowledge of Norse mythology and, like a legit scholar of the stuff, not just playing around.
We all the people on the show, we regulars who are on the show all the time, we actually made a lot of fun of him for that, because he brings stuff up like, these obscure Norse mythology facts, and we would all be like, what? And then he looked at me, he's like, you know history, right? I was like, yeah, history. I need to like go back and read a couple of these mythology books because I don't remember. I have no idea what you're talking about. I mean,
maybe he's got like a photographic memory or something. Just kind of like reads it once and it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty in depth. Pretty in depth, his knowledge.
Yeah. And all the different names and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. He clearly has some Norse language knowledge too. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, while you're in Sweden, have a great evening.
Have a great evening.
We're just getting started out here on the West Coast.
Yeah. Well, have a good Friday.